Hello. Today we're going to be reading our take on Dr. Seuss's classic Christmas telling of The Grinch. However, we've refreshed it and titled it The Year That Stole Christmas. Everyone down in Cheerville liked Christmas a lot, but the Fluke who lived outside of Cheerville did not. The Fluke loathed Christmas. He detested Christmas time. Now, please don't ask why, for we don't even know why this story must rhyme. It could be his head was screwed on ever so loose. It could be, perhaps, his tight undies that goosed. But I think the most likely reason of all may be his heart was 2,020 times too small. But whatever his reason, his heart or his briefs, he stood there on Christmas Eve, despising those creeps. Staring down from his lair with his forlorn, fluky face, at the warm glowing chimneys, he gave them no grace. For he knew every cheer down in Cheerville below was busy now hoping and praying for snow. And they're displaying their creches, he barked with such force. Tomorrow is Christmas, his voice nearly hoarse. Then he smirked his fluke face, it was restlessly jerking. I must find some way to stop Christmas from working. For tomorrow, he knew, all the cheer girls and boys had been cooped up so long they'd rush fast for their toys. And when all that joy, yes, that soul-crushing sound hit his tiny small ears, it left him as drowned. For that's the thing he detested most, was the cheerful joy. Joy, 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 joy! Then the cheers, babes and aged, would sit down for food, and they'd eat, and they'd feast, and they'd snarf in great mood, and they'd eat, 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 eat. They'd gorge on cheer cheeses and juicy cheer pheasant, which was something the Fluke could not stand. Oh, those peasants! And then they'd do something he liked least of all. Every cheer down in Cheerville, the big and the short, would stand close together. With Christmas tunes playing, they'd stand with heads bowed, and the cheers would start praying. They'd pray, and they'd pray, and they'd pray, 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 pray. And the more the Fluke thought of the cheer Christmas prayers, the more the Fluke thought, I must stop them, I declare. So for all of my life I've put up with this Christ. I must stop this Christmas. It's so overpriced. Then he got an emotion, a dreadful emotion. The Fluke got a wonderful, wicked-like notion. I know just what to do, the Fluke coughed from his tongue. I'll make them afraid of a sickness, he sung. And he yacked and he coughed. What a great fluky fluke! I'll do it to Santa and make them all puke! All I need is a partner. The Fluke gazed around. But with no flukes in the flock, there was none to be found. Did that stop the crazy old Fluke? Of course it did not. If I don't have a friend, I'll force one into the plot. So he called his dog Finn, and he took some old rope, and he fashioned a harness, leaving the pooch with no hope. Then he coughed in some bags, and he blew in some tissue. He wiped poor Finn's gums, and spit without issue. The Fluke grabbed the dog, lashing him to an old sled, mushing the pup forward ho, toward the cheers and their dread. All the cheer homes were dim. A cold wind filled the air, and the cheers were aslumber, for Christ babe they prepare. When the Fluke came upon the first cheery home, this is where it begins, the fluky Fluke purred, and he climbed up the roof to begin infecting the herd. Then he plopped down the stack, a quick little jump, but if Santa had done it, he'd have landed with a thump. He stood on the hearth for a moment or two, then he began to exhale, expelling his flu. With the little cheer ornaments hanging so bright, I'll make them disgusting, and he blew with such spite. He creeped and he crawled with a grin most unpleasant. Through the kitchen he peeked, then he spurt on the pheasant. Cheery pies and potatoes with green casseroles, buttered carrots with cookies, and gross cabbage rolls. And he licked and he lathered, the Fluke was so happy, for he knew that his germs would make each cheer feel crappy. He sneaked to the tree in all of its beauty, and he sprayed it with funk from his fluky fatootie. He sneezed on the presents and yacked on the socks. Why, the Fluke even schlicked on the cheerfish and locks. when he realized he'd almost completed his deed. "And now," clucked the fluke, "I'll slay all the Christmas glee." And the fluke sneezed again and then started to leave when he heard a small voice that said, "I still believe." He turned around fast and he saw a small cheer, little Millie Dear Cheer, who'd come to interfere. The fluke had been startled by this tiny cheer child who appeared in the room with her little cheer smile. She stared at the fluke and then started to wheeze, "Why, Santa, I feel sick," as she fell to her knees. Well, you know that old fluke was so smart and so greasy, he thought up a lie and he thought it up easy. "Why, my cute little friend," the faux Santa decried, "you're not really sick, just eating some sweets. These cookies are toxic and smell like cheer feet. I'll throw them away, to my workshop they'll go, and I'll bake you some new ones without a quid pro, ho, ho, ho." And his lie had been cast. Then he pinched her red cheeks, and he wiped away tears that dried and left streaks. And when little Millie Dear Cheer went to bed with her fever, he went to the kitchen, having deceived the tiny believer. Then the last thing he did was to drool on the forks. Next he went up the chimney, that jolly old dork. On their walls he had splattered with splittle and spludge. He even dribbled on their fresh Christmas fudge. The house he infected, for all would be ill. He couldn't wait to spread it through all of Cheerville. Then he did the same thing to the other cheer houses, leaving germs oh so small, even infected cheer mouses. It was a quarter from daylight, all the cheer still abed, all the cheer still asleep, with Finn pulling that sled, packed up with cheer cleaners, paper towel sanitizers, the Kleenex, the soap, toilet paper synthesizers. 3,000 feet up the side of Mount Havoc, he drove that poor dog who'd become quite asthmatic. "Sneer, sneer to the cheers," he was flukishly saying. "They're finding out now there'll be no Christmas praying. They're just waking up. I know just what they'll do. Their mouths will spray open as they holler, achoo! Then the cheers down in Cheerville will cry, 'It's the flu!'" "Ha ha! There's a whisper," hissed the fluke, "that I simply must know." So he paused, and the fluke stopped his sled in the snow. And he did hear a sound rising over the trees. It started so soft, as if carried by breeze. But the sound wasn't sick. Why, this sound sounded fine. It couldn't be real, because it was joyful and divine. He stared down at Cheerville. The fluke tipped his tiny ear. Then he shook, for what he heard were sounds of soft Christmas cheer. Every cheer down in Cheerville, the small and rotund, was praying. He couldn't believe. The fluke had been stunned. He hadn't stopped Christmas, just as expected. They believe. Somehow or other they appear still connected. And the fluke, with his fluke legs knee-deep in the snow, stood wondering and wondering, what could they all know? It came without music. It came without joy. It came without Christ. Or so he had toyed. And he wondered for minutes that seemed as if days. And then the fluke thought a thought emerging from haze. Maybe this year, he pondered, was a fluke mess. And then what happened? Well, in Cheerville they say that the fluke's wee tiny heart grew by 2021 times in that sleigh. In that moment his soul didn't feel quite so weak and meager. The fluke's faith changed just like little Millie Dear Cheer, and he too was now a believer. So he brought back the cleaners and wiped all the houses. He even stopped over to give baths to the mouses. He shopped for more food and he cooked up a feast. And he himself, the fluke, prayed for health, food, joy, love, and world peace. The end. We hope you've enjoyed the story of the fluke, and we wish you and your family a joyous Advent season and a very Merry Christmas to you all.